The veil was still resting on the vanity when she left. Lady Genevieve Marlowe, daughter of the Earl of Ashbourne, never looked back. Not when footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not when her mother's voice broke into despair. Not even when his name tore through the chapel, a cry caught in the throats of 300 guests. She simply walked. The white lace of her gown dragging through the mud, her satin slippers lost somewhere between the back door and freedom itself. 2 years later, the memory still burned. Not the scandal. She had learned to wear that like an invisible scar, but the final image she allowed herself to keep. The Duke of Haverford, standing motionless before the altar, marble stillness, eyes the color of frost fixed on the empty doorway. She had not expected pain in that gaze. She had not expected him to look human. Now in the quiet of the estate she had inherited from her aunt, a forgotten refuge in Hampshire, where no one knew her name and no one dared to ask, Genevieve touched the ring she had never worn. Cold gold, a promise already buried. Then one October evening a carriage stopped at the gate. She recognized the crest before she saw the face. Victorian England did not forgive women who broke their contracts, least of all those who left a duke waiting at the altar. Genevieve knew this when she fled. She knew her name would become poison in society's mouth, that doors would close, that her family's reputation would collapse like a house of cards. But there were fates worse than scandal: to live as a shadow, to die while still breathing, to surrender one's soul for the safety of a title. So she chose ruin. And ruin chose solitude. Her Aunt Constance's estate was small and old, circled by oaks that groaned with every gust of wind. No balls, no collars, only books, silence, and the loyal old governess who had followed her to the end of the earth. Genevieve had convinced herself it was enough, that peace was worth more than acceptance, until that autumn afternoon when the Duke of Haverford stepped out of his carriage, crossed the garden strewn with dead leaves, and knocked upon her door. When she opened it, hands trembling, heart uncertain, she found him changed, thinner, graver. The pride was still there, carved along the line of his jaw, but something else lingered in his eyes: weariness, defeat, and something she dared not name. "Lady Genevieve," he said, his voice roughened by time. "I need to speak with you." Her fingers tightened around the handle. Every muscle in her body begged her to close the door, but she didn't. And in that single moment, the story she thought she had buried came back to life. If you've ever carried the weight of an impossible choice, let this story remind you. Redemption often begins with the courage to open the door. Now, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city below and subscribe for more tales of love, scandal, and second chances. Chapter 1. The Ghost on the Threshold. Hampshire. October 1841. Estate of Lady Genevieve Marlowe. She did not invite him in. For several long seconds they remained in the doorway, she within, he without, as though an invisible line divided two worlds. The dying light painted his face in shades of gold and grey, deepening the hollows beneath his eyes, tracing new lines time or anger had carved around his mouth. He wore a dark travelling coat, simple, unadorned, and held his hat as though it were something fragile. He did not look like a duke. He looked like a man who had lost his way. "My presence disturbs you," he said at last, breaking the stillness. "I understand." The voice was the same, deep, deliberate, each word weighted with restraint. Yet something had changed. There was less command now, less certainty. Genevieve's fingers tightened against the doorframe, searching for steadiness where there was none. "Your Grace should not be here," she said. "Too formal, too distant. There is nothing left to discuss." "There is," he replied without hesitation, "and I will not leave until it is said." She lifted her chin, trying to summon the woman she had been 2 years ago, fearless, defiant, free. But in his presence she felt small, not inferior, only afraid. Afraid he might see through her, afraid that one look could shatter the careful walls she had built stone by stone to survive. "I owe you nothing," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "but I owe you. That is why I'm here." The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. She drew a slow breath, trying to calm the frantic bird beating in her chest. From behind, a floorboard creaked. Mrs. Pemberton spying from the kitchen. The world went on indifferent to the quiet earthquake shaking Genevieve's life apart. "Come in," she said at last. stepping aside before courage abandoned her. 5 minutes. Then you leave. He inclined his head in silent gratitude and crossed the threshold. The room was modest, old furniture, faded rugs, the air faintly cold. Nothing of the opulence he once knew. Genevieve did not offer a seat. She stood by the unlit hearth, arms crossed like armor. He stopped near the window, shoulders rigid, body tense. A soldier returned to a battlefield he had sworn never to see again. Silence stretched between them. "Why are you here?" she asked, weary of waiting. He turned slowly. When his eyes met hers, she saw something that frightened her more than anger or accusation. Raw, unguarded vulnerability. "Because I cannot live," he said, voice almost breaking. "Without knowing why you ran." The words cut through her like a blade. For 2 years she had rehearsed answers, reasonable explanations, polite lies, kinder fictions. But now, face to face with the man she had left behind, all of them fell away, leaving only truth. She had run because she was afraid. Afraid of losing herself, afraid of becoming a shadow, afraid that love would never come, that she would starve for it inside a perfect marriage built for appearances. "I cannot tell you," she murmured. "Cannot," he asked softly, "or will not?" "Both." He took a step forward and she instinctively stepped back. The movement stopped him. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said, raising a hand in surrender. "I came because I need peace. And I cannot find it while your last memory of me is a man unworthy of your truth." Something broke inside her. She had never imagined he suffered too. She had believed that dukes were immune, that pride and title shielded them from ordinary pain. But there he was, bleeding. "I never thought you unworthy," she said, voice trembling. "I thought myself unworthy." The words escaped before she could take them back. He blinked, uncertain, searching her face for meaning. "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms tightly as if to hold herself together. "You didn't know me," she said softly. "And I didn't know you. We were to marry out of duty, alliance, obligation, and I couldn't." She swallowed, forcing the words through the ache in her throat. "I couldn't imagine waking beside a stranger and pretending it was enough." Silence filled the room again, heavier this time, thick with unspoken truths. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost to the crackle of the dying wind. "You're right," he said. "I didn't know you." A pause. "But I wanted to. And you never gave me the chance." She looked up, startled. The Duke of Haverford stood before her, vulnerable in a way she had never believed possible. And for the first time in 2 years, Genevieve wondered if perhaps she had been wrong about the man she left waiting at the altar. Chapter 2. The Confession Kept. Christopher had not expected the truth to be so simple. 2 years spent chasing ghosts, in letters never sent, in sleepless nights, in imagined conversations where reason fought silence, and now at last. Genevieve had given him the answer in a single breath. She could not imagine waking beside a stranger. He should have felt anger, or relief. But what he felt was stranger, something quieter, heavier, understanding because he, too, had been afraid. He had never confessed that to anyone. Dukes did not confess weakness, but on the eve of their wedding, alone in his chambers, he had faced the mirror and seen the man he truly was. A title without soul, a position without purpose, a man trained to manage estates and sign decrees, but ignorant of the things that truly mattered. He had never asked Genevieve what she wanted, never tried to know her beyond the formalities their families demanded. And when she fled, a part of him, small, secret, unspoken, understood. But the other part, the one carved from pride and expectation, collapsed. The scandal had been brutal. Not for his standing, Duke survived everything, but for something deeper, the illusion of control, the belief that he could command even his own heart. She had broken that illusion, and for a long time he hated her for it, until hate turned into something far more dangerous, curiosity, then obsession, then at last a desperate need for closure. "I understand," he said at last, and was startled by how much he meant it. Genevieve blinked. "You understand?" "Yes." He took a slow step forward, testing whether she would retreat. She didn't. "I was raised to fulfill duties," he said softly. "To marry for alliance, produce heirs, manage lands. But no one ever taught me how to be a husband, a companion, a man someone would choose, not simply accept out of obligation." She studied him then, cautious, watchful, but there was less iron in her gaze. "You never said any of this," she murmured. "Not in the weeks before the wedding. You never said anything that felt real." "Because I didn't know how," he admitted. "I was trained for distance, for restraint. My father used to say emotion was weakness, that a duke must never let himself feel. And I believed him. Until you ran. That was the night I learned that all my strength was just another kind of weakness." The silence between them shifted, no longer brittle but fragile, alive, like two wounded souls recognizing the same scar. Genevieve moved away from the hearth and walked to the window. He didn't follow. He simply waited, giving her the space he had learned, too late, that she needed. "Why come now?" she asked quietly, eyes still on the darkening garden. "After all this time?" Christopher drew a deep breath. "Because I was going to marry again." The words fell like stones into still water. Genevieve turned sharply, eyes wide. "You—" "Not quite," he said, raising a hand. "It never happened. 3 months ago I was to wed Lady Henrietta Caldwell. A perfect alliance. Our families approved. She was kind, well-bred, everything the world expected." He paused, the air thick between them. "But I couldn't do it. On the morning of the ceremony, before the guests arrived, I asked the vicar to quietly call it off. I said the bride had fallen ill. No one knows the truth. But standing there alone in that chapel, I saw your face, the moment you walked away, and I understood. If I married that woman, I would be condemning her to the same prison. And I couldn't." Genevieve pressed a hand to her lips, eyes shining. With tears or disbelief, he couldn't tell. "You ran," she whispered. "I did." He gave a mirthless smile. Officially, the bride was sick. But London always finds the truth in whispers. He met her eyes again, voice lower now, almost gentle. "So yes, now there are 2 scandals. 2 cowards, the world would say." He paused, then added softly, "But maybe cowardice is only another name for courage, the kind that stops before it's too late." A quiet laugh escaped her, fragile, but real. "Society knows nothing," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I do." He took one more step toward her, close enough that the lamplight touched both of them. "I know you had the courage I lacked. You chose truth while I hid behind duty. And I came here because—" He faltered, then finished in a voice barely above a whisper. "Because I wanted to thank you. Thank me," she repeated, disbelief softening into confusion. "For what?" "For reminding me I was still alive." The words came raw, unguarded. "For forcing me to feel something beyond obligation. Even pain, even humiliation. It was better than the slow death I once called life." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time in years, something changed in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition, empathy. And Christopher realized he had not come seeking answers. He had come seeking redemption. Chapter 3, The Garden of Thorns. Genevieve had not expected him to stay. When night fell, and Mrs. Pemberton brought in the tea, throwing her sharp, suspicious glances at the visitor, Christopher was still there. He sat near the window in a worn armchair, not as a duke inspecting inferior property, but as a weary man seeking shelter. She poured the tea in silence, her hands steadier now. There was something oddly domestic in the gesture, something that belonged to another life, one she had run from 2 years ago, a life of grand halls, silver trays, and duty mistaken for affection. But tonight it was just 2 people, and the soft rattle of porcelain. "Thank you," he said quietly. Genevieve nodded and took the seat across from him, keeping a measured distance. The clock ticked between them, metallic and patient. Outside, the call of an owl broke the stillness. "Where are you staying?" she asked finally. "At the Thornley Inn, 3 miles from here." "It's rather modest," she noted. "It's perfect," he said, eyes on the dark tea. "No one recognized me. No one bowed. No one called me Your Grace, as if the title mattered more than the man." It was core-freeing. Something tightened in her chest. She knew that tone, the relief of anonymity, the fragile joy of being unseen. 2 prisoners freed from different cages, breathing the same clean air for the first time. "How long do you plan to stay?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. He lifted his gaze, hesitation flickering there. "As long as you'll allow it." The words disarmed her. Not a demand. A request, soft, uncertain, painfully human. I don't know, she admitted. Your presence unsettles me. I know, he said, setting the cup aside, fingers laced together. And if I could promise not to disturb you, I would. But the truth is, I don't know what I'm doing. I came here with no plan, only a need to see you, to understand, to be understood. Genevieve bit her lower lip, torn between caution and curiosity. The sensible woman, the one who built a quiet life out of exile, would tell him to leave by morning. But somewhere within her another woman stirred, the younger one who once fled an empty marriage rather than live a lie. And that woman wanted to know who this man truly was. Stay, she said, before reason could silence her. A few days. But under one condition. Name it. No titles. No formalities. No servants. No, Your Grace, if you stay as Christopher. And I'll be Genevieve. Nothing more. He blinked, surprised. Then slowly a smile formed. Small, honest, warm. Agreed, and just like that they sealed an impossible truce. Her duke and his runaway bride, bound by silence, curiosity, and something neither dared to name. The next morning he came without the pomp of rank, on horseback, dressed simply, wind in his hair. Genevieve met him in the garden, a wild patch of overgrown earth where weeds strangled roses, and time had left everything untamed. It needs help, Christopher said, studying the beds of brambles. It needs everything, she replied, a smile escaping before she could stop it. I've no gardener, and Mrs. Pemberton's bones no longer bend the way they used to. Then I will. You will what? Help. He removed his coat, hanging it on the branch of an old oak. I'm not completely useless with my hands, she laughed. Light, surprised, real, a duke, gardening. Society would faint. Society isn't here, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Only Christopher and Genevieve. Remember, her name on his tongue, stripped of title, stripped of distance, felt startlingly intimate, and so they began, side by side under the October sun, pulling weeds and pruning the dead branches. At first they worked in silence, each lost in private thought, but slowly, the quiet softened, became companionable. Genevieve spoke first, about her late Aunt Constance, about the solitude of the old estate, about the village nearby where no one asked questions. Christopher listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct. He simply listened, as though every word was something rare and precious. And you? She asked at last, when the sun reached its height. What did you do these past 2 years? He paused, hands resting on the rake. I survived, he said after a moment. Managed estates. Sat through Parliament. Pretended at normalcy. But inside, he looked down at his dirt-stained hands. Inside I was frozen. Something inside her gave way, not pity but recognition. So was I, she whispered. I thought freedom would be enough. But sometimes I wonder if I simply traded one prison for another. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Maybe, he said gently. We can help each other find the door. And Genevieve, kneeling in the earth, the sun warming her shoulders, felt the weight of his gaze settle over her. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't alone in her solitude. And the realization terrified her, because it was the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. Chapter 4. The Weight of Silence. Christopher had not planned to stay a week, but the days blurred together, quietly, easily, like mist dissolving in morning light. Each dawn he left the small inn at Thornley before the sun rose, riding through fields still veiled in fog. The air smelled of damp earth. The steady rhythm of hooves was the only sound alive between the hills. At the estate they worked in the garden, she giving quiet directions, he obeying without complaint. Afternoons brought tea, sometimes conversation, sometimes only silence, the kind that felt shared, not empty. It was a life he had never known, simple, unadorned, without masks. And for the first time in years, he felt light. But lightness brings vulnerability, and vulnerability brings questions. Questions he was not sure he wanted answered. On the 5th afternoon, while Genevieve read near the window, he asked, almost against his will, "Do you regret it?" She looked up, startled. Regret what? Running away. The silence that followed was heavy. She closed the book slowly, fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Every day, she said softly, and not a single one. What do you mean? She sighed, setting the book in her lap. I regret the scandal. The pain I caused my family, the humiliation you endured, And the way I left were cowardly, without a word, but—" Her eyes lifted, clear and steady. "I don't regret choosing truth. I don't regret refusing a life built on pretense. Because if I had married you, Christopher, something in me would have died. Not the body, but everything that made me who I am." Her words hit him like a blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He had imagined her as a wife, beautiful, composed, smiling through endless duties. He had never imagined the woman beneath that mask, never thought to ask what she wanted or feared or dreamed. "I would have done that to you," he said quietly. "I would have erased you." "Not on purpose," she replied gently. "But yes, because that's what society demanded. Of both of us. And neither of us dared to defy it. You did." "I did," she said, a sad smile ghosting her lips. "And I paid for it." Christopher rose restless, walking toward the window. Outside, the garden they had rebuilt stretched before him, once wild and ruined, now beginning to show its first fragile signs of order. Life returning to what had been left for dead, he spoke without turning. "What if," he said slowly, "we could begin again?" The silence behind him was so deep he turned, alarmed. Genevieve stood pale, her book forgotten on the floor. "What are you saying?" "I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I only know that these days out here with you have been the best of my life. And the thought of leaving, of returning to London and all that emptiness, feels like suffocation." "Christopher, you make me feel alive, Genevieve." The words tore free, raw and unguarded. "For the first time, I'm not performing. Not pretending. I'm simply being. And I don't want to lose that." "I don't want to lose you." She rose sharply, the book hitting the floor with a dull thud. "You can't say these things." "Why not?" "Because they're not real." Her voice trembled. "You've been here a week. 1 week out of your real life. Soon you'll go back to the world you belong to. And I cannot be the illusion that distracts you from it. It isn't an illusion." "It is." She crossed her arms, protecting herself. "You're in love with the idea of freedom, not with me. You're running from your duties, just as I once ran from mine." "But this isn't love, Christopher. It's sheer desperation." The words cut deep, because some part of him feared she was right. But another part, stronger, defiant, refused to believe it. "Then give me time," he said softly. "Let me prove you wrong." She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw the battle, hope against fear, longing against caution. "And if you prove it," she whispered, "and I still cannot return your feelings?" He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Then I'll accept it, and I'll leave. But I have to try, Genevieve, because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." "What if?" She trembled, barely, but enough. And he understood. She feared the same thing, that maybe, just maybe, second chances could exist. 1 week, she said finally. "You have 1 more week, then we decide." "We decide," he echoed. She nodded slowly, and in that fragile agreement something began to shift. Not love and not yet, but possibility. And possibility, Christopher realized, is the most dangerous seed of all. Chapter 5. The Forgotten Letter. The letter arrived on a morning wrapped in rain. Genevieve recognized the seal before she even broke it. The Marlowe crest. Her father's. Mrs. Pemberton handed it to her with a grave expression. Nothing good had come from that house since the scandal. Sitting at the kitchen table, hands trembling, Genevieve broke the seal. "Genevieve, your mother is ill. The doctors are not hopeful. She asks for you. I beg you to come, if only for a short while. I know you disappointed us, but she is your mother, and time may be short. Your father," the words blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. 2 years without a word. 2 years of silence, as if she had died the day she fled. And now when true death approached, they remembered she existed. But she was her mother. Bad news. Christopher's voice drew her from the letter. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, a basket of firewood in his hands. Lately he had begun helping with repairs, fixing gates, replacing tiles, as if the house had quietly become his too. "My mother," she whispered. "She's ill." He set the basket down at once and came closer. "Is it serious?" "It seems so." She handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression tightening. "You have to go." "I know," she said, swallowing hard. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of everything," she breathed. Facing my father, seeing the disappointment in my mother's eyes, being humiliated again, remembering who I was. Before I ran, Christopher knelt beside her chair, a gesture quiet, intimate, unplanned. "You're not that woman anymore," he said softly. "You've become stronger, braver, and even if they can't see it, I can." She looked at him, startled by the conviction in his voice. "Come with me," she murmured before reason could stop her. "What?" "To my family's country estate." She reached for his hand. "I don't want to go alone. You make me feel less afraid." He hesitated, conflict flickering in his eyes. But then he tightened his grip around her hand. "I'll go with you." They left the next morning in a simple hired carriage. Rain followed them for miles, turning the roads to mud. Inside they sat in silence, each lost in thought, the rhythm of the rain becoming their unspoken conversation. Genevieve watched the grey countryside blur past the window. With every mile the past drew closer. "Do you regret inviting me?" he asked quietly. She turned toward him. "No," she said after a pause. "Do you regret accepting?" "No." A faint smile touched his lips. "Though I suspect your family will not be pleased to see me. They'll blame me for bringing you. Then we'll both be disgraced," he said gently, offering his hand. Together. That word and together lingered in the air like a promise neither dared to speak aloud. Genevieve's fingers tightened around his, drawing strength from the warmth of his touch, and as the carriage rolled through the storm, she felt the truth settle inside her. She was no longer alone, not on the road, not in the reckoning ahead. And Christopher was no longer merely a companion. He was becoming something far more dangerous, something essential. They reached the Marlowe estate by nightfall. The house loomed large and cold, its windows dim, its corridors holding their breath. Servants glanced at Genevieve with surprise and discomfort. Some turned away as if her presence was shame itself. The old butler, rigid, formal, announced them with a tone carved in ice. His Grace, the Duke of Haverford, and Lady Genevieve Marlowe. Silence followed, the kind that lives in old houses and long grudges. Lord Marlowe appeared at the top of the stairs, his shoulders bowed under the weight of illness and age. When his eyes found Christopher, his face drained of colour. "You," he said, voice trembling with fury. "How dare you bring him into this house?" Genevieve lifted her chin. "He came at my request. As a friend." "A friend?" Lord Marlowe descended, anger burning in his gaze. "You humiliated him before all of London, destroyed an alliance I spent years to build. And now you stand here beside him, as if we both have the right to move on," Genevieve interrupted, her tone calm but unyielding. Her father stared as if seeing a stranger. Then slowly he turned to Christopher. "Why are you here, Your Grace?" Christopher met his eyes, unsteady, unflinching, "Because she asked me to be, and because I've learned there are things more important than wounded pride." Lord Marlowe blinked, uncertain how to answer, and Genevieve, standing beside Christopher, felt something stir within her. Not love, not yet, but something close to reverence, admiration, gratitude. He had come, knowing it would be difficult, knowing it would cost him, and still he came. For her. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably inside her heart. She understood at last that freedom had never been about running. It was about who chose to walk beside her. Chapter 6. The Silent Vigil. Genevieve's mother was dying. Christopher saw it the moment he entered the room. The pale skin, the shallow breath, the eyes that already looked beyond this world. Lady Marlowe lay upon a vast bed surrounded by pillows and blankets that could not warm the chill of departing life. When she saw her daughter, something flickered in those fading eyes. "Genevieve," she whispered. Genevieve hurried to the bedside and took her mother's hand. Tears came freely. "I'm here, Mother. I'm here." Christopher stood near the door, unsure if he belonged. This was sacred ground, the space between life and farewell. But then Genevieve turned to him, seeking him with her eyes. And he understood. She needed him there, so he stayed. Lady Marlowe lifted a trembling hand, brushing her daughter's cheek. "Forgive me," she murmured, "for not being stronger, for letting your father, letting society shape what should have been my own life." A faint cough. "You were brave and I was afraid." "Don't say that, Mother. It's true." A weary smile touched her lips. "I married out of duty. I lived out of duty. And every day I died a little, until there was almost nothing left. But you—" her fingers tightened weakly around Genevieve's hand. "You chose to live, and I'm proud of you for it." Genevieve broke, sobbing without restraint. Then Lady Marlowe turned her head, eyes finding Christopher. "Your Grace," she whispered. He stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed. "Lady Marlowe." "Take care of her," she said, a faint smile trembling on her lips. "Not out of duty, but out of promise." Christopher's throat tightened. "I promise," he said. She nodded once, content, then closed her eyes, exhausted. Genevieve sat there, still holding her mother's hand as the breathing grew slower, softer, until there was no sound left but silence. Christopher remained by her side, saying nothing, only being there, the way words never could. Hours passed and dawn painted the sky grey. Lady Marlowe released her final breath, and Genevieve collapsed into Christopher's arms. The days that followed blurred together, shadows of mourning, endless condolences, the smell of candle wax and wilted flowers. Genevieve moved through it all like a ghost wearing her own face. Lord Marlowe did not speak to her, not once, but Christopher saw it, the pain in the man's eyes when he thought no one watched. Regret, too late to mend anything. On the last night before they were to leave, Genevieve went out into the garden. Christopher followed, quietly, respectfully. She stood before the rose bushes her mother had planted years ago, now withered by autumn. "She was never happy," Genevieve said softly. "She married out of duty, had children out of duty, lived her whole life inside a script someone else wrote. And at the end she asked my forgiveness for not being brave enough to live differently." Her voice cracked. Christopher stepped closer, standing beside her in the chill. "But she gave you something," he said. "What?" "Permission," he whispered. "To live differently. To choose courage over conformity. She couldn't do it for herself, but she made sure you could." Genevieve turned toward him, eyes red from crying. "And what if I'm wrong? What if courage isn't enough? What if I end up like her? Dying alone, regretting every choice I ever made?" Christopher cupped her face gently between his hands. A bold gesture, born not of desire but of truth. "Then at least you'll have lived," he said quietly. "Truly lived, with all the pain, all the beauty, all of it. And there is no death crueler than the one that comes to those who never really lived." She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw everything: grief, fear, gratitude, and something deeper that she did not yet name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for not leaving." "I'll never leave you," Christopher said, and when he drew her into his arms, holding her as she wept, he realized it wasn't a vow of obligation. It was something else, something he finally understood of. Chapter 7. The Weight of Truth. They returned to Hampshire in heavy silence. Genevieve felt hollow. The house seemed larger now, colder, as if absence itself had seeped into the walls. Grief for her mother mingled with old guilt, unspoken regrets and questions with no answers. For days she locked herself in her room, barely ate, barely moved. Christopher didn't insist. He only left trays by her door, short notes beneath the plate. "I'm here when you need me." And he waited, not with impatience, but with quiet loyalty. On the 5th day, Genevieve finally came down. She found him in the garden, working alone. He noticed her but didn't stop, giving her the choice to approach. Or to turn away. She chose to approach. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Christopher looked up, setting the spade aside. "For what?" "For falling apart. For dragging you into that house. For using you as—" She hesitated. "As refuge. Don't apologize for needing help," he said gently, wiping his hands. "That's what friends are for, friends." The word felt too small, too fragile to hold what they were. "My mother asked you for something," Genevieve said quietly. "Before she died," he went still. "Yes. Will you tell me what it was?" "She asked me to take care of you. As a duty." "No." He met her gaze, eyes steady, unguarded. "As a privilege." The word landed softly, but its weight filled the air. Genevieve's breath caught. "Christopher, I know you're afraid," he said, stepping closer. "I know trust doesn't come easily after everything you've lived. But you need to know, what I feel for you isn't pity. It isn't guilt. It isn't penance. Then what is it?" He took a breath, deep, steady. "Love," he said simply. "I love you, Genevieve. Not the woman who was supposed to be my bride, But the woman you became, brave, real, imperfect, you. For a moment, time stopped. 2 years ago, she would have doubted him, would have seen duty in disguise, a man preserving reputation. But now, after all they had endured, she knew the truth. His words were not performance. They were promise, and that truth terrified her. "I don't know if I can return it," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "Just let me love you. No demands. No expectations. If, in the end, you don't feel the same, I'll accept it. But I can't keep pretending what I feel is anything less than this." Tears gathered in her eyes. "And if I hurt you again, then at least I'll have been hurt by something real." Genevieve covered her face, sobbing, the sound raw and human. Every wall she had built, every layer of defense crumbled. Christopher did the only thing that mattered. He held her, didn't ask for answers, didn't push for love. He simply stayed, solid, silent, present. And in his arms, Genevieve felt something begin to mend. Not completely, not yet, but enough to believe that healing was possible. That night they sat by the fire. She held a cup of warm tea. A book he barely pretended to read. "When I ran away," she said suddenly, her voice soft as the fire's hiss, "it wasn't because I hated you." He looked up. "I know. It was because I was afraid of losing myself. All my life I'd been shaped by what others expected. Obedient daughter, respectable lady, perfect wife. And somewhere in the middle of all that I forgot who I was. If I ever knew." The firelight danced in her eyes, and Christopher thought he had never seen courage look so fragile or so beautiful. "And now?" he asked. "Now I know who I am," she said with a sad smile. "But I've learned that freedom can be lonely. Being yourself when no one approves hurts more than I imagined." Christopher closed the book, giving her his full attention. "You don't have to choose between being yourself and being loved, Genevieve. You can have both." "Can I?" "Yes." He extended his hand across the space between them. "If you find someone who loves you exactly as you are." She looked at his hand and hesitated. Then slowly her fingers slid into his. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he answered, tightening his hold. "But maybe it's time we're brave together." And in that fragile promise something shifted. Not resolution, not an ending, but a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. Chapter 8. The Inner Storm. Christopher hadn't expected his confession to change everything overnight. But it changed something subtle, almost invisible. The air between them grew lighter, filled with quiet possibilities. Silence no longer stood as a wall. It had become a bridge. He spent his days in Hampshire as if it were his own home, because in truth it had become one, more of a home than any estate he'd inherited, more real than the London halls where he used to pretend he belonged. But reality always sends for its due. The letters began to arrive, at first occasional, then relentless. When Christopher first reached the inn at Thornley, he had written a brief note to his steward. A few weeks in Hampshire. Urgent matters only. It had seemed harmless, responsible even. He hadn't realized that small gesture would become a map leading straight to him. His absence had drawn attention, and attention, in his world, was dangerous. The steward, loyal but discreet, said nothing until the day Lady Agatha Haverford arrived. A woman of iron voice and colder reputation, unused to the word no. Soon after, his cousin Edmund, heir presumptive, dutiful, humorless, was dispatched to retrieve him, to bring him back to reason. It was a morning veiled in mist, when a carriage bearing the Haverford crest rolled up to the Thornley Inn. The innkeeper, startled by the sight of livery and silver trim, bowed low. "His Grace is not here, my lord," he stammered, "but he spends most of his days at an old estate south of here." Within the hour, Edmund's carriage reached the rusted iron gate, and there, among roses and damp earth, he found his cousin, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with soil, sunlight warming his face. "Found you?" Edmund said, stepping down as if completing a rescue. Christopher straightened, spade in hand. "Edmund." "Everyone's worried," Edmund said, glancing around, clearly disoriented. "What are you doing in this place?" "Living." The word hung between them. "Living?" Edmund frowned. "Christopher, you've vanished for weeks. No letters, no appearances. London is talking." "Let them talk. It's not that simple. You have duties, titles, expectations. You can't just..." Disappear. Christopher set the spade aside and met his cousin's eyes. I'm not disappearing. I'm choosing. Choosing what? Her, Christopher said simply. Edmund blinked. You can't mean Genevieve Marlowe, the woman who humiliated you, who destroyed your name. Christopher's voice was calm, steady. Yes, her. You've lost your mind, Edmund said, appalled. No, I found it. He stepped forward, eyes bright with conviction. She showed me there's another way to live. That duty isn't the same as purpose. That I don't have to die every day to keep others comfortable. This is madness. No, Christopher said, his tone turning low and certain. Madness was 30 years of playing a role I never chose. This is sanity. Edmund faltered, his composure cracking. You can't mean to stay. I do. I'm not abandoning my title, only reclaiming myself beneath it. The cousin studied him, baffled, shaken, defeated. She's done this to you, he muttered. Yes, Christopher said softly, and I thank her every day. For an hour, Edmund argued, with logic, with duty, with fear. But nothing moved him, and when the carriage finally rolled away, taking with it the expectations of an entire world, Christopher knew something with perfect clarity. He would never return. Not truly. Not to the life he had before. Genevieve had watched the conversation from the window. When Christopher entered the house, she was waiting, tense. He came to take you back, she said quietly. Yes. And you? I stayed, he replied, then paused. But I have to be honest with you, Genevieve. One day, I'll have to return, at least for a while. I can't abandon everything. But? He stepped closer. I don't want to return to the life I had. I want something different. And I want that. With you. Her voice trembled. What are you saying? He took a breath. Then, slowly, knelt before her. Genevieve gasped. Christopher, what? I'm not asking for marriage, he said quickly. Not yet, I know you need time, we both do. But I'm asking for a chance, a real one, to build something honest, at our own pace, far from their judgment. How? She whispered. I don't know. He took her hands in his. Maybe we divide our lives, London and here. Maybe we marry quietly, without spectacle. Maybe we invent an entirely new life. I don't have the answers, Genevieve. Only certainty. I don't want to live without you. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so afraid, she confessed. So am I, he said softly, kissing her hands. But I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you. She drew him up, close, trembling, and for the first time let herself believe. Not entirely, not yet, but enough to whisper, stay, just stay. He smiled faintly, still kneeling, and whispered back, forever, if you'll let me. And in that quiet room, with rain whispering against the windows, both knew there was no going back. Chapter 9. The Confession at Dusk. The days that followed felt strange, suspended in time. Genevieve lived as though inside a fragile bubble, a world apart where titles held no meaning, where the past carried no weight, where love could grow quietly, unjudged. But bubbles by their nature never last, and deep down she knew it. Life in Hampshire moved gently, like breath. Mornings in the garden, afternoons spent reading, simple dinners by candlelight. Then came one late November afternoon. The wind was cold, whispering of snow to come. Genevieve wrapped herself in a shawl, but Christopher took off his coat and placed it over her shoulders. You'll freeze, she protested. I'll survive, he smiled. I'm quite resilient, she laughed, a soft new sound that came more easily these days. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a small stream that marked the edge of the property. The water ran clear over smooth stones, catching the fading gold of sunset. When I was a child, Genevieve said, sitting on a flat rock, I used to come here with my aunt. She said this place was enchanted, that if you whispered a wish to the water, it would carry it to the old gods. Christopher sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. Did you believe her? I did, she smiled faintly. I made so many wishes here. For beauty, for love, for a perfect life. Foolish things, childish things. Not foolish, he said gently. Human. She turned toward him. In the soft amber light he looked different, gentler, more human, more real. What would you wish for now? He asked. If you still believed in magic? She thought for a long moment. Months ago she would have wished for peace, for acceptance, for the world to forget her scandal. But now, I'd wish for courage, she whispered. Courage to accept happiness, even when I don't deserve it. But you do deserve it, he said, voice steady and sure. Do I? She asked, laughing bitterly. I abandoned you, Christopher. I caused a scandal, destroyed reputations. How could I possibly deserve happiness after that? Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said, turning to her and holding her face in his hands. Do you think I deserve to be happy, after being cold, distant, blind to the woman beside me? Yes, she said softly. Then why should you be any different? The words landed like a quiet revelation. Genevieve had always been her own harshest judge, carrying guilt like a relic, demanding perfection from a heart too human to give it. But Christopher saw through it and refused to let her hide behind her shame. I'm afraid to believe, she whispered. Afraid that if I allow myself happiness, something terrible will happen. It always does. Maybe, he said, resting his forehead against hers. But living in fear of future pain isn't living. It's only existing. How did you get so wise? She smiled through tears. You taught me, he murmured, kissing her forehead tenderly. You taught me how to feel, how to be honest, how to value the present instead of fearing the future. She closed her eyes, letting his warmth dissolve the last of her defenses. And then, after one fragile heartbeat, she turned her face and kissed him. It was not hesitation. It was surrender. Christopher froze for a breath, then answered her, drawing her closer. The kiss was soft yet fierce, filled with months of tension, weeks of unspoken words, days of restrained longing. When they parted, both were breathless. Genevieve, he whispered, his voice trembling. Don't speak, she said, touching his lips. Just hold me, he obeyed. And they stayed like that, as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the world in gold and violet. And in that twilight, Genevieve allowed herself something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that love might still be possible. That second chances might exist. That she could have both freedom and belonging. It wasn't certainty, not yet. But it was a beginning. And for the first time, a beginning felt like enough. For a few days, life seemed almost simple again. Work, tea, laughter. Until a new letter arrived, carrying the weight of the world back into their hands. That night they sat together by the fire. Mrs. Pemberton had retired early, leaving them alone. Improper, perhaps. A single lady and an unmarried man, but Genevieve no longer cared. Society's rules felt so far away. I need to tell you something, Christopher said, breaking the quiet. What is it? She asked. A letter came today, from my steward. There are matters in London that require my presence. A legal dispute, a vote in Parliament. Things I can't postpone forever. Her heart tightened. You're leaving. Temporarily, he said, taking her hand. But I don't want to go without you. You want me to go to London? She asked, startled. Yes, I know that city holds pain for you. I know what they said. But I don't want to live two lives anymore. One here, one there. I want you with me, truly, publicly. Christopher, it would cause another scandal. Let it, he said, eyes blazing. We've caused one before. What's one more? She laughed nervously. You're mad. Madly in love, he said, kissing her hands. Come with me, Genevieve. Not as a secret, but as the woman I love. The woman who, if you'll let me dream, will one day be my wife. Her breath caught. Are you asking me? Not yet, he smiled. But I'm telling you my intention, so that when you decide you'll know exactly what you're choosing. Genevieve looked at him, the duke who became a gardener, the aristocrat who learned humility, the stranger who became her home. And she realized something quietly powerful. She had already chosen weeks ago. Perhaps the moment he appeared at her door. Unguarded, imperfect, real. London. The word flickered through her mind like a scar that had finally stopped bleeding. I'll go, she said softly, with you. His smile was like sunrise, and when they kissed again, bathed in firelight, they both knew. They were falling, together, without safety, without certainty. Only trust, and it was terrifying, and it was beautiful. And it was real. Outside the wind howled cold, but inside the fire burned high, and Genevieve knew winter could come. She had already found the warmth she'd been searching for all her life. Chapter 10. The Return. London greeted them with a storm. Not in the sky, the heavens were clear, but in society. The moment Christopher's carriage stopped before his Mayfair residence, curtains trembled, servants whispered, and rumour took fire. The Duke of Haverford had returned, and he had brought her. Genevieve felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes before her foot touched the step. "Breathe," Christopher murmured, hand steady around hers. "You are not alone." She nodded, trying to believe. The residence was everything she had imagined, vast, opulent, intimidating. Servants lined the entrance, expressions neutral, eyes not. The housekeeper, a severe woman of middle years, bowed to Christopher with automatic reverence. Then her gaze reached Genevieve and faltered. "Mrs. Henderson," Christopher said, calm but firm. "This is Lady Genevieve Marlowe. She will stay here as my guest. Prepare the rooms beside mine, and see that she is treated with every courtesy due." A blink of surprise, then, "Yes, Your Grace." Genevieve felt every glance as she crossed the great hall. Crystal chandeliers, Persian carpets, ancestors gazing down from oil and gilt. A world as far from Hampshire as winter is from spring. "Intimidating," she whispered, once they were alone in the library. "Home," he corrected softly. "And now yours as well." She searched his face, uncertain. "I don't know if I belong here." "You belong where I am," he said, drawing her close, "and I am here, with you." But belonging was never simple. In the days that followed, Genevieve felt like an intruder in a museum that moved. Servants were perfectly polite and perfectly cold. Visitors let curiosity seep through their decorum. When Christopher left for Parliament, the house seemed to lengthen into corridors without end. She wandered and tried not to disappear inside them. It was Mrs. Henderson who broke the spell. She found Genevieve in the library, a book open and unread in her lap. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Marlowe," the housekeeper said quietly. "Yes." "Only this." The woman hesitated, an unfamiliar act on a face trained for order. "It is good to see His Grace happy again." "Happy?" Genevieve breathed. "Yes." A small, honest nod. "These last years he has been a shadow, duty without life. Since Hampshire, however, there is light in him. I believe you are the reason." Tears rose unbidden. "Thank you," she whispered. When the door closed, Genevieve sat very still. Perhaps she was not a burden. Perhaps she was an anchor. Perhaps she was exactly what he needed. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was what she needed too. The true storm arrived folded inside an envelope. The Duchess of Roxbury, a distant cousin of Christopher, was hosting her annual ball, an invitation that could not be refused. Christopher received it and insisted that Genevieve attend with him. "I can't," she protested. "It would be humiliating. For you, for me." "It would be liberating," he said, taking her hands. "I want them to see. I want them to know. You are not a secret to be hidden, but the woman I have chosen, publicly." "Christopher, it will destroy you." "Then let it." The fire in his eyes did not waver. "I am done living for borrowed approval." Against every instinct of self-preservation, Genevieve said yes. The night arrived too quickly. She dressed with care, a simple, elegant gown of deep blue. No spectacle, no plea, only truth. When Christopher saw her standing at the head of the staircase, something altered in his face, a softness, a hunger, a reverence. "You're beautiful," he said, voice roughened. "I'm terrified." "So am I." He offered his arm. "But we will be terrified together." Their entrance detonated like a silent bomb. Conversations broke. Fans stilled. Eyes widened. Her name whiskered through the air. Is it her? The one who ran? How dare he? Genevieve's instincts screamed to flee. Christopher's hand tightened, not to restrain but to anchor, and he led her through the sea of stairs with his head high. They did not dance at once. First he introduced her, not as Lady Marlowe, but as Genevieve, the woman I love. The murmur was audible. Some turned away. Some, unexpectedly, smiled. Lady Catherine Thornton, famed for a tongue sharper than any tailor's needle, shattered the ice with grace. "Lady Marlowe," she said with a knowing smile, "I hear you had the courage to abandon a marriage that would have smothered you. I admire that. God knows many of us have wished the same." Genevieve blinked, startled. "Thank you, Lady Catherine." "Don't thank me," the lady said lightly. "Simply be sure that if you marry him now, it is because you wish it, not because anyone expects it." Something tilted in the room. Not everyone approved, they rarely do. But some, the ones who mattered, saw past the scandal to the truth. Two people trying to write a different story. When Christopher finally took her to the floor, Genevieve trembled. "Are you all right?" he asked, as the waltz gathered them in. "I'm relieved," she admitted. "I thought it would be worse." "It will be," he said with a wry smile. "There will be more judgments, more darts thrown from a safe distance. But now, at least, we face them together." She looked into his eyes, blue, steady, brimming with love, and understood. She was no longer alone. And that changed everything. "I love you," she said, before fear could catch the words. Christopher stopped moving, there in the center of the floor beneath a chandelier of blazing crystal and 100 startled gazes. "What did you say?" "I love you," Genevieve said again, steady now. "I don't know when it began. Perhaps when you appeared at my door, perhaps in the garden, perhaps when you held me as I wept. But I love you, Christopher, and I am afraid." He drew her close, improper, scandalous, perfect. "Do not be afraid," he whispered into her hair, "because I love you too, and together we are stronger than any judgment." And there, under glittering light and astonished eyes, they kissed. A declaration, a defiance, a promise, the beginning of everything. Chapter 11. The True Proposal. The scandal was enormous. The newspapers could not stop writing. The Duke and his runaway. Cruel caricatures spread through London's parlours. Invitations grew scarce. Christopher's aunt sent a furious letter demanding he come to his senses. But Christopher did not care. For the first time he was living for himself, and for her. Genevieve, however, was not so certain. "You're ruining your reputation because of me," she said one evening, weeks after the ball. They were in the library, their shared sanctuary. She read, he wrote, silence flowing easily between them. "I'm not ruining anything," Christopher said, setting down his pen. "I'm rebuilding on a real foundation this time. But society will adjust. Or it won't." He rose, crossed the room. "Either way, it no longer matters." "It matters to me," she whispered. "I don't want to be the reason for your fall." Christopher knelt before her, a gesture that had become almost natural. "Genevieve, you don't understand. The society you think I'm losing, I lost it years ago. I lost it when I stopped living, when I became a man of duty instead of a man of soul. You didn't make me fall, Genevieve. You gave me the ground back beneath my feet." She touched his face, tears trembling in her lashes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because for the first time in my life," he said, pressing her hand to his chest, "I feel I'm not merely existing anymore, I'm living, and I want to live every day that remains with you." Silence. The kind of silence that makes the world hold its breath. Then he drew a deep one of his own. "Marry me," Genevieve gasped. "Christopher. Not out of duty, not for alliance or reputation, but because I love you, because I cannot imagine a future without you, because you make me want to be better, not a better duke, but a better man." Tears slid down her cheeks. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll try again," he said, smiling, tender and raw. "And again. As many times as it takes. Because this," he gestured between them, "is worth every risk." She looked at him, and he could see the battle inside her. Fear against hope. Past against future. Until she nodded, slowly. "Yes." The word was barely more than breath, but it struck like thunder. "Yes?" He could hardly believe it. "Yes," she said again, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you, not because I must, but because I want to. Because you've shown me that love and freedom can live together. Because with you, I am more myself than I have ever been. Christopher drew her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss overflowing with everything that words could not carry. When they parted, both laughed, dizzy with joy and disbelief. We'll marry quietly, he said. No crowd, no grandeur, just us. I don't want anything grand, she smiled. I want something real, simple, true. Then that's what we'll have. And in that moment, they sealed a promise, not perfect, but honest. And sometimes honesty is stronger than perfection. They married 3 weeks later, a small country chapel far from London. Only Mrs. Pemberton, Mrs. Henderson, and Edmund, who came despite his reservations, stood witness. Genevieve wore a plain white gown, unadorned, Christopher a dark suit, stripped of every ducal insignia. That day they were not Duke and Lady. They were simply Christopher and Genevieve, two souls who had found redemption in each other. When the vicar asked them to repeat their vows, Christopher took her hands and said, I promise to love you as you are, not as the world expects you to be. I promise to honor your freedom as much as our bond. I promise that when fear comes, I will stand beside you. And I promise our love will always be a choice and never a duty. Through tears, Genevieve answered, I promise to trust you, even when my past tells me not to. I promise never to run again. That when things grow hard, we will face them together. And I promise you will never be a prisoner of this love, because love that cages is not love at all. And we both deserve open skies. When they were pronounced husband and wife, their kiss was gentle and carried the sweet weight of everything they had survived. As they stepped out of the chapel, hand in hand, facing the wind and the future, they knew they were finally free. Not from society, it would always judge, but free from needing its approval, free to simply be themselves together. Chapter 12. The Blooming Garden. They chose to live between two worlds, part of the year in London, fulfilling ducal duties when required, appearing at society events on their own terms, and part in Hampshire, at the estate they had restored together, turning refuge into home. It wasn't easy, it never is. Society remained divided. Some eventually softened, others never would. But Christopher and Genevieve had learned something precious. The worth of love is not measured by the world's approval. The spring following their marriage, they returned to Hampshire. The garden they had once started together was unrecognizable now. Roses bloomed in wild abundance. Lavender perfumed the air. There was life where once there had only been neglect. Genevieve knelt in the soil, a habit she'd never abandoned, no matter how unbecoming it was for a duchess, and brushed her fingers along the petals. Do you remember when all this was weeds? She asked, smiling. I do, Christopher said, kneeling beside her. I remember everything, the day I arrived, the fear in your eyes, the door that almost closed. Why didn't I close it? She asked softly. That day, I should have sent you away. Why didn't I? Because a part of you, small but brave, wanted to know, to understand, and that part won. And now? Now, he said, pulling her close. There are no more doors, only paths we build together. She kissed him there among the flowers, beneath the tender sun of spring, and she felt peace at last. Not perfect, life never is, but real, true, theirs. That night, they sat together on the terrace, watching the stars. Do you ever regret it? Genevieve asked. All you sacrificed for me. Sacrificed? Christopher laughed softly. Genevieve, you gave me everything, life, purpose, love. Everything I lost were only illusions that once kept me chained. Society still talks. Let them, he said, kissing her forehead. As long as you're beside me, their voices are just distant noise. She rested her head on his shoulder. I love you, she said, the words now light, effortless. And I love you, he replied, entwining their fingers. Always. And beneath that endless sky, two hearts that had nearly lost each other finally found a home. Not in titles, not in property, but in one another. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Epilogue. The blooming years. Years later, when Genevieve looked back, she could see clearly the paths they had almost not taken, the door she almost closed, the words she almost swallowed, the fear that almost won. But it hadn't. And it was in that quiet, daily victory, that private rebellion against fear, that they built a life neither had thought possible. It wasn't perfect. There were hard days, when judgment still stung, when doubts returned, when the weight of the past threatened to crush them. But on those days, they held on to each other and remembered. They had chosen this, chosen truth over convenience, chosen love over approval. Christopher never regretted it. He doubted, yes, feared often, but regret? Never. For Genevieve had given him something far more valuable than rank or title. She had given him authenticity, the chance to be a man, not merely a role. And in rediscovering his humanity, he found not only love, but purpose. They rebuilt the garden. They built a home. They built a family, not as society expected, but in the way that made sense to them. 2 children, a boy with his father's curious mind, a girl with her mother's serene smile, ran through the rose bushes laughing, gathering flowers their mother pretended not to see. And in each laugh, Christopher saw proof that life rewards those who dare to begin again. In every rose that bloomed, he saw a reflection of their love. It had begun as barren soil, tangled with thorns, marked by neglect, but with patience, care, and faith, it had become something living, beautiful, and fertile. In the 5th spring together, as the sun sank over Hampshire, Christopher and Genevieve sat once more in the garden, now lush and overflowing with life. Their children played nearby, laughter floating in golden light. They did not speak. They simply were, side by side. Hands entwined, and in that comfortable silence both knew they had found what they were looking for. Not perfection, but redemption. Not in society's forgiveness, that still changed with the wind, but in mutual forgiveness and self-forgiveness, for being imperfect, for failing, for almost destroying the chance they now cherished. And from that forgiveness, a different love was born. Real, enduring, free. The veil she had once left behind was never worn. But the hands that had once hesitated and now steady had woven something stronger than silk or ceremony. They had woven choice, daily choice, conscious choice, free choice. And sometimes, Genevieve thought, kissing her husband as their children ran among the roses, choice itself was the most sacred vow of all.